So thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. We had our morning meeting and it was full of a lot of information and a lot of sharing, which was great. So I appreciate that you're here. I'm here with Ellie Stack, who's the coordinator from the Office of Special Ed Instruction. She is my counterpart with procedural support. And I want to thank Christina Roman, who's here projecting for us, and she is working the PowerPoint for us. And everyone here who's presenting, from DP&E to Office of Special Ed Instruction to our Alice and P-List, who are working with us today. So we've got a full agenda, as we always do. We are going to take questions after each presentation. So we had plenty of time this morning to take questions, so we're going to continue to do that. We'll be looking at transition, and we'll be looking at DP&E corner. We'll be looking at topics in there, a break, assessment updates, a little bit on ESY and some OSEI updates, and then we'll have questions again. Ellie has been putting in the copy of the session, the meeting guide in. We had some issues this morning, but it seems like there's been some issues with Google itself. So just let us know if something is not working. And our first topic on our agenda is going to be the early childhood, which Ellen Glazer and Christina Roman are going to speak to the next two slides. So I'm going to turn it over to Ellen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm talking about a concern for teams to be thinking about when it comes to preschool reevaluations and students from Child Find and our preschool class-based and resource transitioning into kindergarten. So sometimes when students are in Child Find or in preschool services, they have also been in them since they were in infant-toddler connection, and they may not have ever had a full or formal evaluation done. So sometimes when students transition from ITC to preschool, they have something called a condensed evaluation, which is made up of multiple data sources, sometimes autological, sometimes observations, just various items to pieces of data to support the child in their transition to preschool. However, many times there isn't a sociocultural, educational, or psychological evaluations done during these condensed evaluations or done during this transition. So what we're really asking is for teams during the transition time or before the transition time actually, to look at students that are going into kindergarten and do a formal reevaluation. We really want you guys to strongly consider the formal assessments to help really understand where the child's functioning is and where their strengths and weaknesses are. And we are asking that for students who the team is considering transitioning the students into placement where they're going to be on the adapted curriculum, that we do absolutely have formal assessments and data. So just some things to think about so we can get kids appropriately placed and not have sort of concerns about students who might be in an adapted curriculum placement, and then we don't have formalized data to back up that decision that we made.
Okay, thanks, Ellen. Good afternoon. I just have a few reminders for preschool teachers when completing the dual language assessment. For section 1, just want to make sure that the information is filled out after having a discussion with the parents. Section 2 would also be completed by the preschool teacher. And section 3 has 2 parts. The preschool teacher will draw a conclusion about expressive and receptive language skills in the home language as well as English. And based on those conclusions, the local screening committee will determine how to test during evaluation using the key in the school use only section. A reminder to please add the completed DLA to the student's working file. And I included the link to the FCPS.net DLA site on this slide. And you can find a link to the DLA questionnaire in your meeting guide. Are there any questions about preschool? Okay.
Okay, thank you, Christina. So we're going to move over to trying to talk about transition. Ellie's been putting the meeting guide and the link to the PowerPoint. If for some reason when you're open up your meeting guide and that link doesn't open directly, we've been having, as I said earlier, some Google kind of issues this morning. But our next group is Dawn, Rory, and Gina, Wendy, Michelle, and Ashley, who's going to be presenting on transition. So I'll turn it over to Dawn and Rory.
Thank you, Debbie. Good afternoon, everyone. We are now moving into the time of year where we need to start thinking and planning the transition of our students from one school to another. It's easy to forget some of the critical steps and components of this process, and so today we will be facilitating some group discussions to share and generate ideas. I want to draw your attention to the transition procedures and timelines document that was provided to you previously by your PSL. They're also available for you today, and this will help support with your planning as we have discussions regarding preschool to kindergarten, elementary to middle school, and also for our students in which we're exploring the continuum of services. We can go to the next slide. In just a moment, we're going to move into breakout groups. Within your groups, please use the link in the chat window to access the discussion guide questions. You'll have 12 minutes to discuss the questions, and then we'll come back together as a group and share any aha moments in the main room. I was able to jump around a few groups, and I heard some wonderful conversations and sharing of ideas. Thinking about the discussion guide questions, let's share out and reflect and any questions that you might have. So you can either raise your hand or you can type in the chat box. What are some of the ways that we're thinking outside of the box to help with this transition season that's coming up? Rory?
The difficulties of figuring out how to do the observations, given that kids are mostly online learning, and the challenges of getting a true picture of what the students' abilities are or what they're going to be like in an actual school setting versus at a home setting where things are very different. And they talked about the importance of really relying on the data from the teachers who last had the student in the school building and how much important that was going to bring forward in terms of helping making their recommendations.
Or 3 comments really about either video tours, visual pictures of rooms instead of having tours, and virtual tours. Do any of you who posted those comments want to expand on how you are doing pictures or virtual tours?
And kind of record the school so that we can share that with our students who have never been in there before. And they were very excited, thought that was a great idea. So that's kind of how we're doing those virtual tours for our students right now.
That sounds like a great idea. Does anyone else have anything to share?
Transition meeting. We also had some conversations around students who were former Fairfax County students or have always been private school students, and how we're going to make sure we communicate that information to the middle school about our private school and homeschool families. Well, Ashley, I don't mind chiming in. This is Dawn again. I think it comes to that early communication, being open with both schools, and just being aware of who the students are that you're going to be receiving. And I was kind of hoping one of my groups would share something, because I loved it when the teacher shared that when your PSL comes to you and kind of talks about a student, and you want to think about that continuum of services, you probably wanted to have that conversation a little earlier rather than waiting to the last minute of the school year. So I just think that early planning, that frequent communication with the receiving school is going to be important. And minimizing how much you put in email too. That's another good thing to remember. Have the conversations on the phone or verbally.
Yes, thank you, Dawn, for that plug coming from due process and eligibility. I also just want to quickly add into just a reminder to you all to certainly use the elementary to middle school transition procedures handout that's in the guide, to look at the timeline so that you guys can start planning things out as we are moving into this phase of planning this. I see Amy posted how she's just receiving the forms about students that they're receiving, so yeah, we definitely want you guys to start planning things out, because this is the time to start doing that, and that timeline has been very specifically outlined in that document in the guide notes. So
in the chat, someone mentioned that they're just starting to receive the forms for the transition for the preschoolers, and waiting to find out how they can observe. And I know even for my schools, the ones that I needed to send out, I was receiving some. Those transition forms for preschoolers should have been out by now. So I would say, as being the receiving school, if you have your list of anticipated incoming kindergartners and you don't have all of the forms, it'd be a good idea to reach out to your PSL to let them know that you haven't received all the forms and who you haven't received forms from, so that we can begin the process of getting those tracked down for you, and getting you in contact with the teachers that have those students to help the process move along. Another comment is making sure we consider the social, emotional, and behavioral needs of students, and collaborating, since we won't have the same opportunity to observe these aspects of a student. Honoring parent concerns, plan to allow extra time now to build relationships. So those are all, part of that process, and because we're virtual, it is going to take a little bit more. I'm sure some of you have heard, I know I have, a lot of parents are hesitant about their children moving on to the next grade, whether it's coming into kindergarten or going on to middle school. Because they've been virtual for so long, they feel like they're not ready for the next grade. So begin to, in your mind, work as a team to figure out how you want to address that. Talk about the students' progress. Talk about, how they're making progress on what is being taught. And have those conversations with families, and be prepared that those are things that you're going to have to talk about, because this is a different time, and people are feeling apprehensive about their students. Parents are usually apprehensive about them going to the next level anyway. It's an added layer. So reach out to your PSLs for support if you're finding you're having that conversation. For those preschoolers, remember that if parents are talking about keeping children, or looking for those kindergarten waivers, that you would need your PSL and your early childhood manager at those meetings. So reach out to whoever those people are for your team.
Thank you, Michelle. And as Michelle shared, your PSL is here for you. Please reach out to us. We are here to help with these transitions. Our next presenter is Alice Lima Whitney, and she's going to introduce to some and review for others the P-List resource.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me today. Listening to some of the conversation, I see the P-List as a possible tool that can help with the processes that you are all describing, and I'm just going to jump in. So the P-list started as a tool to support transition to middle school and high school literacy intervention conversations because it was difficult to communicate from school to school. So this tool was developed to facilitate that conversation, to streamline communication about actual placement recommendations in literacy intervention, to simplify the access to the data, and to increase consistency of the data for use in placement decisions, as well as actual placement practices. And then lastly, to support earlier staffing decisions. We really want schools to be offering what students need, not necessarily offer what they offer and then try to fit kids in it. So hopefully this helps to have earlier discussions about students regarding their placements for middle school and high school. So obviously today we're going to focus on first what you can use this tool for your rising middle schoolers, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen in a moment, but if we could skip to the next slide. This is how you access the tool. I have already accessed the tool, and it's not necessary for you to do so right now. I just wanted to point out that by accessing the FCPS intranet and selecting account sign-on and then EDSL, and you use your typical network credentials. And then the next slide. Once you get to that very daunting first page of EDSL, I recommend that you do a catalog search for the word responsive or MTSS. And then in the search results, you'll see responsive instruction MTSS insight. And I recommend that you highlight or star that so it's one of your favorites. And then you would click on that to open up the worksheet for your school. And now I'll go ahead and share my screen so you can see what it would look like. There we go. So here I am in the tool, and I have already selected the focus for P-list. Some of you may be familiar with this tool, so I don't know if you'll learn something new, but you can chime in at the end and share your insights as well. But once you've selected the literacy P-list focus in the MTSS worksheet, you'll see that it filters to only students that scored below 420 on their last reading SOL. This is going to be an issue this year because that last reading SOL will be from 4th grade rather than from 5th grade at this point in the year when we're talking about it. It will update if students are able to take the SOLs this year. It will update automatically, and your feeder schools will get that information as well. What it also does by selecting this focus is it aggregates the data that we know schools should be looking at when making these kinds of decisions for students. So we know you're going to make a literacy intervention recommendation. We know that you want to look at a couple years or 3 years of reading SOL data, as well as core content, their ESOL status, and what you'll notice is missing from this list right now is their special education status. And that was a privacy concern, so I want to show you how you can add that. You'll click on columns, and you'll type in SPEC, and you highlight it. Anything that you highlight in the columns on the left impacts what you see on the right. So now you'll see that this column was added for special education status. So what we're really looking for when we're doing intervention placements is we're looking for trends. So I want to show you how you can look at a student's SOL history. And when you're also looking at their SOL history, you might notice that a student has taken the test more than once. So they may have passed on a retake. So if you click on the student score, you'll see their history here. Now, of course, this year we only have 2 for this particular student, but you'll see that they did not pass the first time they took it, and then they had a low passing score the second time. And again, this is where you would see if they retook the SOL and passed on a retake with a low score. The next thing that might be useful for you to look at is their screener data. So when you click on the screener percentile, you'll notice that it gives you not only their history, but it also shows you their domain level scores. So the way it's supposed to work is if students have scores in the domains that require an additional diagnostic, they might get an additional diagnostic. So some schools, most schools will do a DRA, and that is another column you can add. Going to the columns, typing in DRA, and now that score has been added. I also like to add the DRA score date so that I know when that last DRA happened. So all of you are familiar with additional diagnostics that may have occurred for that student, and how do we share that information not only with each other in our building, but also with the school that is going to be receiving this student that may benefit from support. And what we recommend is that you use the literacy notes column. I'm going to switch so that you can actually see this in action, because this is live and this is not. And I'm also going to make it just a smidge bigger. Well, maybe not. So you click on literacy notes, and you'll see this plus sign when you enter it. Any staff member can enter information for a student. So if you click on the plus sign, here you can add information about a student's DSA or any other diagnostic assessment that you might have used for that student. And in the guiding documents that are linked on the last slide of my portion of this presentation, as well as in your guide, you'll see examples of how to enter information there. The other thing that might be entered here is if a student is using a program, you can select the program and then make a note of their progress in that program. I'm just going to type a few letters so you can see what it looks like in the aftershot. So now you'll see that I've made a note about this student using rewards. And I could go back and edit that, or I could add another note that would about a diagnostic. Maybe I did an oral fluency test and I wanted to document that. The other thing that often comes up is, what do we do with our dually identified students? And that is an important piece of the conversation. Let me go back here to the live one. I'm going to sort this so that we can see a student that is dually identified. And what I would like to do is click on the WIDA Access Overall so that I can see their domain level scores on the WIDA as well. So I can look at their last one, and I can see that their reading is at a 3.6, which is probably likely to exit this year if they're on making progress, and their overall literacy score and their writing score. So that's just a talking point that you might have in your meetings with your colleagues when talking about a specific student. Another thing that comes up is workload. 79 kids, I have to make a comment about 79 kids or make a recommendation. And the fact is that not every student is going to require a recommendation. So once you do look at the student's data, not every student is going to require a recommendation. And also, you can sort by only those students receiving special education services. Now that I've added that column, I'm given the opportunity to then filter by using these boxes over on the left. So notice that it went from 70-something kids to 18 kids. So that makes the process a little bit more manageable. And then the other potential sorting tool would be to sort by teacher, another way to make this a more manageable process. And I do want to point out that you can sort specifically by ELP level. By sorting by ELP level, you can look at trends in a student that has either maybe maintained, not made progress on WIDA, look at those scores, compare them to their reading scores, and have a conversation about what you're seeing and what might be the best next step for that particular student. Lastly, when you are ready to make a recommendation for a student, you would click on, I'm going to click over here so you can see it, Literacy Recommend. Click on the plus sign, and then you'll see the courses that are available to that student. Or you can also select other if there's a specific program that that student might receive during a targeted intervention outside of one of these classes. And all of those classes and targeted intervention are described on the guides that were provided to you, both in a link in this presentation as well as on that last slide. I'm sorry, or as on the guide for the meeting. Let's see. John and Rory, did I miss anything that we wanted to cover?
Not that I can think of. The only thing I can think of is if you want to plug your PLIS tour, of course.
Oh, two things. Thank you for reminding me. First, anything that you put inside of literacy notes or recommendations is encouraged actually to be shared with parents and with students and their families so that they know how people arrive at these decisions. It's also accessible via FOIA and FERPA. And then I will go ahead and make the plug that I often support schools, either individual teams at an elementary school or teams at an elementary school with the middle school, or even whole entire pyramid, a vertical articulation conversation about using the P-list to support some of the decision-making processes that you all are undergoing at this time of year. So there should be a link in the slides to how to get in touch with me, and we can talk about what your team might need, and I'm happy to help out with that.
Thank you, Alice. We did have one question in the chat, and that's from Allison from Gunston. And she asked, so will the elementary school teachers be adding notes and making a recommendation in EDSL?
So elementary teachers are encouraged to make notes. You'll notice in the guidelines or the guiding documents from this year that we've identified that there should be a literacy contact, somebody who is sort of managing the process so there's not 20 people trying to put in a literacy recommendation, and so that one person can review all of the data and make that decision. Every school is going to do that a different way. So someone from your office, from the SPED side might say, we'll do all the SPED kids and make recommendations for those kids. And then if your reading specialist might want to do it for the gen ed kids, and then your ESOL person might want to make them for the ESOL kids. So every building sort of does that in a different way, but we do recommend having one person kind of know what's going on. And then I see another question. Should we add literacy notes in earlier grades to provide longitudinal information? Absolutely. That would be fantastic. I think the more information we can share longitudinally, the better, so that students don't end up stuck in programs that aren't working for them, so that they get moved around. This really is meant to be a tool and not a list. It just happens to, the acronym worked out that way. Anybody else? This is really hard to do virtually because normally I can see your faces and see what questions might be percolating. But please feel free to reach out if you need any help with accessing documents or guides or accessing the tool or a reminder about how to use it, or if you would like me to work with any of your teams. It's a great pleasure to work with all of you.
Thank you so much, Alice. Dawn and Rory, did you want to share anything else before we move on to DP&E Corner?
Yes, we were getting ready to share. Thank you, Alice, for joining us. In addition, on your participants guide, we also have links to resources that Fairfax County Public Schools offers that you can share with families. And you do need your VPN access in order to get it, because it is through the intranet. But again, as always, reach out to your PSL if you have any questions, and definitely about the P-list, reach out to Alice.
Is going to present first on restraint and seclusion. So I believe Brad is here. He's been having trouble with his link. I see him.
Hi, Debbie. How are you? I'm not going to turn my camera on, though, just to help with, because I have been having connection issues.
That's okay.
So how's everyone doing today? Happy Monday afternoon. We're going to start off with a light topic, restraint and seclusion. Just kidding. So what we're going to be talking about is the FCPS Restraint and Seclusion policy that has been effective since January 1st, 2021. Our policy is in compliance with the requirements of the Virginia Department of Education. And just to note that our policy, which was voted on and approved by our school board, either meets the VDOE policy or we meet or exceed that policy. Sorry about that. And then just to start off too, that seclusion is only going to be permissible at the Burke School, Key Center, and Kilmer Center. For restraint seclusion, we do have some trainings. Probably everyone in this room is already aware of our first one, which is de-escalation level 1 training, which is the understanding the regulations governing the use of restraint and seclusion, which probably showed up on your My PDE playlist. This is for all staff that work with students in the school building. Then we have our level 2, which is our advanced training. And in Fairfax, that's either going to be our MANT or our PCM, Professional Crisis Management training. Those trainings are for at least one administrator per building. And so that being said, most of our administrators have met that, or they're in the process. Those trainings are coming up. Or that level 2 is going to be for any staff member who's the IEP or Section 504 determines that a student that they work with is likely to be physically restrained or secluded. They will also need to receive that advanced training. In addition, we are going to have, which is coming soon, the policy overview. This is going to be required for all staff that have received de-escalation level 2, the advanced training. This past Friday, we did our principals. So all administrators are going to be getting this training. So we started with our principals last Friday, and next week we have 2 different training dates for our assistant principals, which is going to be this policy overview. What I'm going to go over today in this training is just as leaders in your building what you need to know, but it's not the policy overview. It's like the overview of the overview. So this is just kind of like a sneak peek for those who will be identified, who will need level 2, which will later be an asynchronous for our teachers. Next slide, please. One thing I really wanted to highlight is our definition of seclusion. Now, our definition of seclusion has not changed. However, we do have a better understanding from the VDOE of what that definition is. So I just wanted to read it with you guys, saying that it's the involuntary confinement of a student alone in a room from which the student is physically prevented from leaving, provided that no such room or space is locked. So that key word in that is alone. So if we were to think about it in an example, so say there was a student that, was engaging in high rates of a challenging behavior, and you were in the classroom and it was no longer safe, and you did a class evacuation where all the other students may leave. However, if you're the staff member and you're in that room with the student, working through those behaviors, going through that crisis cycle, and that student attempted to leave the room and you possibly use some blocking and redirecting to stay in that room, that would not meet the definition of seclusion because you were in the room with the student. So I wanted to highlight that. Next slide, please. Some key highlights of this policy in the initial development and substantial review and revision of the student's IEP or 5014. If the student's IEP or section 5014 determines that the student is likely to exhibit behaviors that would result in a physical restraint or seclusion, then that IEP or section 5014 should determine and see the need for, is the FBA, do we have one? Do we need one? Do we need to revisit it? What that student's behavior intervention plan might be, any changes need to happen, any new or revised IEP goals, and any additional evaluations or reevaluations for that student. In addition, that would also then to identify, so if that was a case and you guys determined that the student is likely, making sure that those staff members receive that advanced level 2 training, which would either be PCM or MAM. Another big highlight, within 10 school days following the first school day in a single school year in which an incident of physical restraint or seclusion occurs, the student's IEP or 5014 shall consider an FBA, a new revised behavior intervention plan, back to revised IEP goals possibly, any additional evaluations or reevaluations. And if it's a student who's a gen ed student, something else that team might want to consider would be a referral to local screening. So those are really important. And again, so that's within 10 school days following the first day in a single school year. And this is an example where our policy exceeds the VDOE policy, because when you probably took those modules, you might have said it was after the second instance, but our policy is after within 10 school days of the first incident in that school year for this to occur. Next slide, please. Some other highlights. So the restraint or seclusion happens as soon as practical, but no later than the day of the incident. The staff members involved shall report the incident and the use of any related first aid to the school principal or designee. The school principal or designee or other school personnel shall contact the parent regarding the incident and any related first aid that occurred. The employee involved in the incident or other school personnel that may be designated by the principal shall complete our written incident report, which is our use of physical restraint or seclusion incident documentation form, which we're going to go over in a little bit. We're going to provide to the principal or designee this written incident report, and then we're going to provide the parent with a copy of the incident report all within that same day of the incident. As soon as practical, but no later than 2 school days of the incident, the principal or designee will have a staff debrief, and that's with all involved to discuss, whether the use of restraint or seclusion was implemented in compliance with our policy, how to prevent or reduce the future need for physical restraint and seclusion. And these staff debriefs are really key. It's going to be that time where the staff that were involved, and it also might be some other staff that weren't involved, but it might be a member of the crisis prevention team in your building. It could be other people who would support, but it's really the goal of this meeting is to make sure that we are reviewing as soon as possible. And with this, it has to be within 2 days. What occurred? What was leading up to it? Thinking about that crisis cycle. What did staff do at what level of the phase? How can we support the students so that way in the future it won't have to happen again, hopefully. Then we have as soon as practical, but no later than 2 school days of the incident or return to students to school. You want to have that student debrief. And this is what we're going to be, which going over the details of the incident in an effort to assist the student or school personnel in identifying patterns of behavior, triggers, or antecedents. What are alternative positive behaviors and coping strategies that might be helpful? The impact of the restraint or seclusion of that student. And it's really, when we think about as that student goes through that crisis cycle, we want to make sure that we are keeping that, building positive relationships with that student and making sure that they, we're conversating with them if it's appropriate, making sure they have what they need moving forward. Next slide. As soon as possible, but no later than the end of the following school day, depending on the student, then there's something we're going to call a student conference. This is in an area where we exceed in our policy that was added by members from our school board and our community. This is going to be so the student can choose a trusted adult. However, if not possible, due to the age or developmental level, school staff may choose among team members and or consult with the parent guardian regarding the most suitable staff for this conferencing. This is going to occur, so again, thinking about using your clinical staff in your building to support what supports may be needed or to explore further resources. And then highlighting that if the student declines this, then it doesn't have to occur. I also just wanted to kind of make the student conference and the student debrief. Now those might be two separate meetings, or they could possibly be the same meeting depending on the student, because we really want to make sure that we are, when we're doing these debriefs, that it's appropriate for that student. They have all the accommodations, modifications they might need. Sometimes it might be two meetings, sometimes it might be one. We're really going to do what's best for the student. Next slide, please. Then following an incident of restraint or seclusion, the school staff will provide the student or parent's guardian with resources and offer them an opportunity to participate in that follow-up conference. Now this can be done with your clinical team in your building as well as with your administrators. But if additional support is needed, don't be hesitant to reach out. And this might come up during that staff debrief or even the student debrief. Who are other people either in the building or outside the building that can help support this? So it could possibly be your ABA coach, your behavior intervention teacher. It might be your PSL, myself, somebody from due process and eligibility. The whole point is that we do know that this is a lot for the school, and we are here to help support you guys, and you're not alone with it, and we can help see what needs to be done together. And then lastly, that staff have support from the Employee Assistance Program. So thinking about, again, because going through the crisis cycle, and if a student had to be physically restrained, that might be a lot on our staff as well. It could be just as traumatic for them, letting them know that there is our Employee Assistance Program, which would help them with that. Next slide, please. Now we're going to go over the use of our new documentation form. It's in your packet for today. I highly, highly recommend open it in Internet Explorer, because if you open it with Google, if you click on the link, it might work, but it might not. Sometimes it shows the old previous form that this replaced, or you might get an error message or like, please wait. Just copy the link and open it in Internet Explorer, save it to your desktop, and you should have no problem. Next slide, please. Okay, so now that we're filling out, so an incident of restraint or seclusion occurs, you're going to check, is it going to be a physical restraint or a seclusion? If you're checking seclusion, it's because you're at Burke, Ktea, or Kilmer Center only. It's going to put the student's name, date of birth, gender, grade, ethnicity, student ID, school. We're going to be indicating, is it a gen ed student, a student with an IEP, or possibly 504 plan? And if so, what's their primary disability? Do they currently have a behavior intervention plan? Yes, no. And this is all really good information. One thing I would also like to point out is with our new policy that's going into effect, we're going to have a central office. It's going to be called a Crisis Prevention Review Team. That's going to have lots of members of stakeholders from MTSS, PSL, Behavior Intervention Services, our intervention and prevention, so psychologists, social work, and what where a role is going to be, it's going to be using the data that's collected. So when an incident of restraint or seclusion occurs, making sure that you guys in the building are getting support as fast as possible, but then also what we could be doing collaboratively to help support you guys at the school when it comes to restraint and seclusion. Moving down, so the date of the incident, when did it begin, when did it end? And in this example that you can see that the time frame was between 10 o'clock and 10:10, but the actual physical restraint was only a total of 3 minutes. So then you can see a little bit down, you're gonna document each instant of that physical restraint or seclusion. So for in this one, from 10 o'clock to 10:01, there was a 1 minute physical restraint. Then from 10:03 to 10:04, it was 1 minute again. And then from 10:09 to 10:10, it was 1 minute. So that's how we're able to, and again, that's going to give us great information for you guys in the building, but also the central review team that's going to be able to look at this and see, okay, so what happened, how long did it occur, how frequent are in that total duration, how many instances of physical restraint occurred, is it going down, is it going up, all that kind of stuff. Next slide, please. The next part of it, you're going to have to document the staff members that are performing the physical restraint or seclusion, and are they certified? So in the first one, it's for staff who received MANT. You see that Jane Doe was a teacher. Yes, she was trained, and she implemented a one-person side body hug. That implemented one-person side body hug comes right from MANT language of a procedure you might use. In professional crisis management, you'll see Jane Doe was a teacher. Yes, she was trained, and she implemented a two-person standing vertical immobilization. And John Doe was the IEA, who was also trained and implemented a two-person standing vertical immobilization. Now, this morning a question came up, and this relates more specifically to MANT. So when COVID first hit, people who were already MANT certified, to not lose their certification, they did a virtual through Blackboard where they did the non-technical aspect of MANT to be trained. So for people who receive that, they still need to then receive the second part of that training. So you would not be able to implement a MANT procedure because you have not went through and got recertified yet. So that's a question that came up. And as we were talking about earlier with the trainings, the ABA team and Behavior Intervention Services team have done an amazing job as trainers trying to get one administrator trained per building. So that was like the main priority over the winter break. We're now moving to the next phase and make sure that we're getting everyone who needs to be certified as identified who needs the training, but then also those people from MANT who received just part of their recertification. You should be either probably have already been contacted or you'll be contacted soon about getting your second part to make sure that you are MANT certified. Next slide, please. The next part of the form is going to be where you're going to identify the least restrictive interventions used prior to the use of the physical restraint or seclusion. So this is where you're going to be marking so that you try to block and redirect. You were using your reinforcement system, offering choices. So from here, you're going to check all the ones that apply to what you were doing right before the physical restraint happened. If something that you did is not one of the items listed, you would mark other and then type in what you did. And if for some reason there were no least restrictive interventions used, you would mark that box and define why. Next slide, thank you. So in this section this kind of comes right from our policy, and when you do the policy overview training, which will go into great detail, in order to implement a physical restraint or seclusion, it must meet one of these 5 reasons, in which is the reason why we implement the physical restraint. So number 1 being prevent a student from inflicting serious physical harm or injury to self others. 2, quell a disturbance or remove a student from the scene of a disturbance in which a student's behavior or damage to property threatens serious physical harm or injury to other persons. That being said, I wanted to make a special note as well that property destruction alone does not meet the criteria to implement a physical restraint or seclusion. It must be that the physical, if the property destruction, like if they completely tear a room, and I know it's difficult to watch, and they throw 5 computers on the ground, that again does not meet the criteria in which you would implement a physical restraint. It would only be if they were picking up possibly the monitor and they were using that as a weapon, then that would be a different scenario. Defending yourself or others from serious physical harm or injury, obtain possession of controlled substances, and obtain possession of weapons and other dangerous objects. So you would mark one of those 5 reasons, or it might be 2 or 3 in which you implement the physical restraint, and then in the box you're going to provide a detailed description of what that student's behavior looked like. So if it was aggression, you would say aggression is defined as with a closed fist, made contact with the staff on the right arm 8 times. So when we think about filling this out, you want to be as objective as possible. And I sometimes say, it'd be like if you took a picture of the behavior and described what exactly you saw in the picture, would be what we would want to put in this box, which is going to give really good information for the team in the building as well as the crisis prevention review team, what's going on and how we can help support. Next. Thanks. And in this section is going to be very important, where we're going to provide a detailed description of the incident, including the antecedent, the resolution, and the process of return to the student to their educational setting. This is kind of where that antecedent behavior consequence, kind of the whole picture, again, is going to help support you guys in the building, as well as central office, to how we can collaborate and work together to really see what was that antecedent. You know, was it because it was during a transition, given an instruction? What was the resolution of it? The process of return back to, so in here, in the policy overview training, we go into great detail and practice what this would look like. Next, please. Numbers 4 and 5. Number 4, you're going to provide a detailed description of the physical restraint or seclusion method used. And this kind of goes back to that first box where we showed the example of a PCM example and it met. That kind of was a sentence starter for what this would look like. And in this section, you would go into detail again, what happened, how long did each procedure last, what exactly does it look like. Box 5, did anyone sustain bodily injury? It's going to be a yes, no. So if it's a no, you would just mark no. But if it's yes, you would then list the date and time of the response from the personnel, the notification, and treatment if applicable. Next slide, please. Getting into the home stretch of our documentation form, area number 6, 7, and 8, you're going to see are the staff debrief, student debrief, and that student conference. Right below it, you're going to see was it completed or in progress. And as we just went over, we talked about this written documentation has to be sent home the day of. However, the staff debrief and the student debriefing conference, you have 2 days. It's as soon as possible, or 2 days to get this done. So in the best case scenario, you know, the behavior happened in the morning or even in the afternoon, and you had that opportunity to do the student debrief and the staff debrief. Or what if it happens at 4:30 as you were transitioning onto the bus? There might not be time for this to happen. So if you're able to do it, you're going to mark complete, the date and time, and you're going to be good. If not, you're going to put in progress, and then you are going to have to come back to the form, which so you're going to send the form home, but then the day later, you're going to have that debrief. You're going to go back to it, change it from in progress to completed, and then put the date, and you're going to resubmit it to the email, which we'll go over in a minute, as well as you would then send it to the parent again. Right below that, you see method of debrief, and I remember thinking, what is a debrief? It's a team meeting. It's as simple as putting team met. If you want to be a little bit more specific, so maybe your team meeting happened over Microsoft Teams, you might say virtual meeting with the team. The important thing is that it's happening. So the student debrief, the student conference, and then you can see under student conference where it says student decline conference, that's because that part of it could be that the student declined for that conference to occur, if that's appropriate. Number 7 and 8, like I mentioned earlier, might also be able to happen at the same time. Again, it's really going to depend on that student, what that student needs, what level of clinical support. The important thing is, though, that these debriefs and conferences are going to be individualized for that student, making sure that they have what they need for it to be successful. Do we need visuals? Do we need accommodations and modifications? All of those things. Number 9, we're getting into the notification of the incidents. So the first one, when was that program administrator notified? When the contact was made with the parent. So in addition to that, you're going to have to mark either was it phone, text, email, in person, or it could be other. What if you called and left a message because you didn't speak with the parent? You might mark other, left a message on parent's voicemail. Then it gets into the copy of the incident documentation emailed. Now this is new. In the past, with the when the form is completed, you either ponied or emailed to Mike, the Director of Special Education Instruction. Instead of doing that process, what you're going to do is you're going to get this form, and you're going to, if you click on that crisis prevention link, it's basically crisis prevention at fcps.edu. So when you send that electronically, it's going to go to that Outlook inbox, which is going to have members. It's going to have Mike. It's going to have Tina Wilkerson from ABA, Sarah Cooner from Behavior Intervention Services, somebody from psychology, social work. It's all the stakeholders in central office that are going to be members of that crisis prevention review team. And the reason why we're doing this is because we want to make sure that we are getting, giving you guys the support in the building that you need as soon as possible. So that way, instead of having to, it's just going to cut down the response time, that we can then get together and respond to you. So again, making sure that moving forward, when you submit your forms, it's at crisis prevention at fcps.edu. And then lastly, the copy the day you send the form home. I think that's it. Any questions specifically around restraint seclusion? I do want to say that there's on Mondays from 3 to 4, there are optional office hours that you can come to and attend. The link is in your packet today, but can also be found from the DPE intranet page. You can email me out directly, and I appreciate your time. Questions?
Hi, this is Carolyn Edner from Hutchison Elementary. My question is, as someone who is PCM trained and has been involved in these incidents in the past, I understand why you want all this data, and this is very good data, but while you're in the middle of supporting a crisis, it can be very hard to have the exact moments that the PCM was done within it and all of this detail. Do you have recommendations for the best way to collect this data while responding to the crisis?
Absolutely. I think the number one priority is to make sure that the student and other students and staff are safe. So I think it's coming up with whatever that system might be, because that's our number one priority, right? Second would be then, could it be someone you're co-teaching with, or maybe an instructional assistant in your building? Can you just write on the board some time so we remember, so when you are, because you're right, it's hard to make sure that you get all that time in the amount, like the time that it happened, how long it occurred. So those would be some of the things that I would maybe proactively as a team, maybe even having a team saying that, because, as a team, we determined that these 2 students might be likely for this to occur. What can we do proactively together so when this does occur, we can get what we need? So when this happens, maybe one person that's an IA that's working with the other students on the other side of the room, but you might just call out start time 9:05, and they write that time down for you. Or maybe you put it, I've seen some teachers write it on their hand, or you might write it on a Post-it note. You got to come up with a system that works best for you. But if you need some support with figuring out what that system might be, again, I think you could do that in your building, or you could reach out, speak with your ABA coach, or your behavior, you said PCM, so it would be your ABA coach. Reach out to them and say, what are some strategies you might think that we can kind of help with this? Other questions? I don't think I see any in the chat.
No, Brett, I don't see any in the chat as well, and any hands up. But if you think about other questions, when we get to the end of the presentation, you could stay in, and we'll talk about that later. And you can ask those questions. The facilitators will be in the room, the main room at the end, if something should come up. Or you put a question in the chat.
Either way. Or you can also, like I said, you can come to those optional office hours, reach out to me directly. But I'm going to be through the rest of the presentation. So if another question comes up, don't hesitate.
Thank you, Brad. Our next presenter from Due Process and Eligibility will be Rory, who's going to be looking at independent educational evaluations and just giving you some updates.
Thank you, Debbie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rory Duffield. I'm one of the specialists in the Office of Due Process and Eligibility, and we've been asked to kind of give you guys a little bit of an update regarding individual education evaluations, or IEEs. This particular summer, the superintendent's memo went out, as you can see, in September to all school divisions, explaining some clarification of the federal guidelines regarding IEE requests and with regards to parents' rights. Specifically, as you can kind of read through the slide, is that parents can now ask for an IEE in an area in which their child was not previously assessed. So, for example, if a child during reevaluation or initial eligibility only had a psychological, social, cultural, and an educational evaluation, the parent could also then, in an IEE, request a speech and language. Prior to us realizing or finding this out, it used to be 1-for-1, but we are now realizing that we cannot limit the parents to that. So that's what came out in that superintendent's memo. So what that exactly means to us as a school team, if we'll move on to the next slide, there are 2 takeaways that we would like for you guys to understand from this new guidance we have received. Specifically, because parents can now request an IEE in an area not evaluated, that there may now be some eligibility meetings or IEP meetings or whatever the case is, where we have to consider a private evaluation in which we do not have an FCPS equivalent evaluation. And that can also affect different areas of eligibility that we did not initially consider when we were going through eligibility. So for example, if a parent requests a speech and language evaluation and it had never been done before, and we never had any concerns of that, but the parent for some reason does, then we have to consider that, and we would have to look at that private evaluation with good eagle eyes and looking through those evaluations. So we are definitely starting to see some new evaluations being requested from parents, so that it is becoming a little bit of a hot topic, and that's the reason why we wanted to bring it to your attention here today. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. It's no part in terms of the school team not necessarily doing a good job with considering or doing a fully comprehensive evaluation, but just happening. I see a question in the chat. It says, if there's a private assessment, does FCPS have to do an equivalent evaluation? Like if they do request an IEE speech, whether they would then do an FCPS speech evaluation? It would be nice to do that, Aaron, if we have the opportunity to. The key factor that we sometimes run into with that is that we don't want to duplicate the same exact testing that was done in the private, because then it doesn't make the results necessarily valid. So we might do some supplemental testing potentially to get some additional information just so we can kind of have something on our end. But that's not always going to be the case where we have the opportunity, because the parent may not give us consent to do that evaluation. So, of course, it's contingent upon that. Any other questions? Well, thank you, everybody. If any further questions do pop up, then feel free to contact us. Thank you, Lori, for putting that additional information in the chat. It is not required for FCPS to do that additional evaluation.
Thanks, Rory. I'll jump right in there with some information and reminders about recovery services. So I just wanted to kind of put a reminder out there about the continuing for IEP teams to think about recovery services for students. It really is our legal and ethical responsibility to be looking at our students and thinking about whether or not they require recovery services to make progress in their IEP goals. We have heard from several parent groups that they have concerns that it's on a parent to bring up the idea of recovery services. So we just wanted to, discuss that a little bit. Recovery services are not compensatory services. Recovery services aren't that anybody did anything wrong. Recovery services are just something that a child might require because of the pandemic and the situation that we've been in with virtual schooling for a lot of students. So recovery services are also not intervention. A lot of school administrators are working on intervention plans right now for students, and they might be putting together small groups that will be meeting either on a regular basis outside of the school day, like in mornings, weekends, or evenings, or during the school day. this is something different than recovery services. So those services would not be documented on the IEP. The recovery services, are the services that the school team has looked at in an IEP meeting, has examined data to see that the student really hasn't made the amount of progress that they should have made or had been making on their IEP goals because of this situation. So they're all a little bit different. So also under recovery services, some schools are having a hard time with having teachers available for in-person Ktea testing, and part of that is that we have testers available for schools. So you would be looking at the DP&E intranet site, and there's directions for all of that to get all of that information to either be a tester, and also if your school needs a tester. The next part is recovery teachers. We have a group of teachers that are willing to teach recovery hours. It's always our first, we'd always prefer that a teacher in the building provide the recovery hours, but we also do have a group of teachers that are willing to provide recovery services to children when the recovery services are documented on their IEP. They're always going to, the teachers that I have that are always going to be providing those recovery services outside of their contract hours, but that's not to mean that all recovery services have to happen outside of contract hours. Students can receive recovery hours during the school day, and on Mondays, the teachers just then cannot submit to be paid if it's during their contract time. So school teams have a lot of flexibility in figuring out what's going to work best for a student when it comes to recovery services. Additionally, recovery services can wait until in-person instruction resumes. So if the IEP team is feeling that, yes, the child does need recovery services, but it wouldn't be beneficial to the child to have virtual recovery services, the IEP team can document the conversation and that they do agree that recovery services are going to be needed, and they can then wait to actually put the services on the services grid until we know that we can provide those services in person. So you would just go through the process that's listed on the intranet page and document everything on the plot page, and you go back and do an addendum, most likely without a meeting, to just get those services onto the services grid when we are able to do in-person recovery services, if that's what the IEP team feels is needed for the child. So it's important when you are putting recovery services onto IEPs, or when you are getting testers from DP&E, it's that you follow the procedures for letting us know what students are being worked with. We have to document that so we know how many teachers we're going to need, and so we can start to kind of estimate. So if I get like 50 emails after this meeting saying that you have already put recovery services on an IEP but you're waiting for in-person instruction, it will just help us in planning and paying and processing all of that paperwork. The other reminder is to be just really careful when you're on the services grid. We ran a C-STARS report recently, and 60% of the students who have recovery services on the services grid of their IEP, it was just a clerical error. They had maybe they meant to choose F, or they meant to choose V, but they chose R. So if you could just be really careful, a lot of you guys out there are going to be principal designating IEP meetings. If you could just kind of focus in and make sure that people aren't inadvertently choosing R, that would be wonderful. And talking a little bit about adding the recovery services, of course, it is a data-driven process and a decision. The supplemental information is on the intranet for, to help guide teams, but it doesn't need to be super complicated. If you have a student who is at a DRA 10, but in February they were at a DRA 16, that would be something that that could be some data that you could use to decide the student's really having a hard time during the pandemic, and maybe we need to strongly consider recovery services for that student. So it's all sorts of data can be used for making that decision. DRA, iReady, there are a lot of things available for you to make that decision. And it's just really important that we at DP&E know when you have decided that recovery needs to go into an IEP, that we have that information. Are there any questions about recovery? Go ahead. Sanaz?
Yes, so it's you had mentioned Ktea and I may have missed it. Is there going to be any training in regards to that? I may have just missed what you had shared about that.
So training for the KTEA, is there somebody from OSEI that can answer that?
Hi, yes, this is Ellie Scott. And yes, we are offering training in the KTEA, both for people who were trained before the shutdown, and we're giving refresher sessions, and as well as new training, people who are trained. If you are interested or need to attend the training, please contact Tracy Puckett, and I'll put her email or her name in the chat window, and she'll be able to send you the information.
So in terms of what DP&E can offer is we can help if you don't have trained testers in your school. We can help find you a tester that can test students outside of contract hours to help you make sure that you're staying within timelines.
Ellen, there are 2 questions in the chat about recovery services.
Would in-person recovery services start when their specific cohort came back, or would it start as soon as any student returns? So that's really going to be an IEP team decision. That it's perfectly fine for them to start when their group comes back. It's also fine to wait and see how they adjust. It really has to be an individual decision that the IEP team makes with the family. Oh, that's what Lori said.
Ellen, and there's one before that. It says if a student is struggling with the virtual environment and in need of recovery services, it says I'm confused as to what situation would virtual recovery services be appropriate.
So sometimes it is appropriate for kids. They may not be making as quick of progress in the virtual environment, but given a small group and very specialized instruction, working on their program, it might be appropriate. That's why it just has to be a very specific situation. Our kids are in school less hours a day, so that could be why the student would need recovery services to work on their goals to be making progress. There's a lot of factors that could come into play with that. I think I saw one more. If a student with an IEP is identified for an additional school intervention, could this be used instead of recovery services, or should students eligible for recovery services not be identified for school intervention groups? So my answer to that would be, if the students need the services to make progress on their IEP goals, I would say those services need to be documented on the IEP and need to be serviced through intervention. If there are other needs that students have, or they fit into a group that's already happening, I think that would be where you would see kids who might be identified into the sort of intervention groups. Is that helpful, Karen?
They could be in both. You could have students who are in intervention and they could also be receiving recovery services. So it's just going to depend on that students' needs and where the areas of concerns are. I think the next one, Ellen, is can IAs provide recovery services during the school day or on Mondays?
So we have not had IAs providing recovery services. If an IA is providing a recovery service, I would just think that it might be a very specific program that they've already been trained in. And if it was happening on Monday or during the school day, it would still get documented on the IEP, but then that person would then not be, wouldn't be paid for for being outside of their contract hours. And there is a whole kind of situation with IAs working outside their contract hours that is not really going to work for this situation when it comes to finance. So yes, recovery services can be provided during the day. I think I saw Dawn come in. What do you think, Dawn, about IAs providing recovery services? Oh, Lori, go ahead.
I'm not sure that's a great idea in terms of asking them to work outside their contract day. Yeah, I think it's a supervision issue. Are you thinking about them doing, like, I guess whoever asked the question, are you thinking about them doing like an EBP that they would normally do during the school day, or did you have something else in mind? I'm just trying to clarify a little bit.
I'm just as much exploring our options because we do have IAs who are trained in evidence-based programs, and so I just wasn't sure where recovery services would come into that. But I'm fine with they can't. I just didn't want to not use a group of people who may have more flexibility in their day than some of our teachers, especially on Mondays.
I think
Dawn,
that makes sense.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Dawn. I think we've been saying in our documents that it needs to be a licensed, a teacher. We haven't put in our documentation to families and stuff that it is an IA. So I think, I think we would have to, all those individual cases would have to come through before we would say it's an IA. Because I think our documentation really does support teachers as the primary. Okay, there's another one, Ellen.
Okay. If a student is provided recovery services with the service of a specific reading or math program but is also getting this program support during the school day, will the student revisit lessons they previously completed or move ahead in the program during the recovery services? So that's going to be a really individualized, decision. Does somebody else want to weigh in on that? Debbie, Dawn, Lori?
I was going to ask Ellie because I know that depending on the programs, they may have some. So Ellie, can you, so the question is asking about the programs and getting support during the school day and then revisiting the lessons during recovery.
I think this is a great question, and it's funny, you can tell by how we're sort of asking if other people have the thoughts on this. I would actually, in my mind, because it's recovery services, I would think we are moving forward with the program, but I also understand how that can mess up the class grouping. But when I'm thinking about recovery, if it's to help for the instruction that was missed or to help bring the student up. So I'm not sure. We might want to talk about this further and get clarification. But I love it when you stump us. But I think we might want to just make sure on this and get back to you.
Okay, thank you, Ellie.
Emily?
Yeah, is there a specific time limit we're thinking, or you guys are thinking for recovery services? So if this is supposed to be like an added kind of like support interventions time to obviously recover, is there a max amount of time to propose, or is it just kind of a team decision?
It's definitely a team. No, you go ahead, Debbie.
Oh, go ahead, Ellen.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, it definitely is a team decision. So are you talking about, meaning how far out can we offer recovery services for, meaning in the summer and not now, or are you just meaning the amount of time, like 9 weeks versus 12 weeks versus 2
and I
months?
guess like the time limit. So if it would be like 20 minutes, a day, or 30 minutes, and if, let's say, the student needs, like we say it needs like an hour a week. Yeah, so never mind. As I'm talking it out loud, I kind of am understanding what I'm
it's a
asking.
good question. No, it's a good question because it's going to depend on the team. And that's where you can come back after you said, maybe you decided it's going to be, 30 minutes for 9 weeks. And after you come back after 9 weeks, the student is making progress but still may need more or may need something different. Or after 6 weeks, the student has made huge gains and you're really rethinking as to whether or not he really requires another 3 weeks. Those are IEP team decisions, so you can come back and extend or shorten if the parent agrees and consents. And then we got the question about, the need for more than one area. So you've got recovery needs in math, you've got recovery needs in reading. So you may choose to do reading first and then come back and then revisit math after you worked on, or you may work on them simultaneously. It's really going to depend on that stamina of that student and what that student, some students, another 20 minutes at the end of the school day is all they can do once a week. So it's really going to depend on the student and the conversations you have at the meeting. Does that help?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you.
So the answer is yes, we are still planning on this group 5 coming back, and they're in looking at the students, to expand on how you define the group, Tara, it's not necessarily students who are having difficulty with virtual instruction. We are looking for students who are have this intensive support needs. Which, in some cases it is with the virtual instruction, but there is information available on the Special Ed Hub that helps to define this group. And we can certainly, Tara, you and I can talk separately if you want to talk more. But regarding a group 5 for a specially identified students with disabilities, yes, that is still considered a group.
Thank you, Ellie. So we're going to move into our break. We're just a little bit behind. So we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we will come back and we will listen. Ellie will provide us information about BAP. We are almost ready to get started. Just a few more seconds. And then we will have Ellie come on in for our next presentation.
All righty. Well, welcome back, everybody. And as we're coming back from break, and it's getting a little cold outside, I was reminiscing how last Wednesday, when we checked the weather, I noticed, or my husband told me to tell you the truth, that the forecast for today was 3 to 5 inches of snow. And the kids were in the car with us, and we were talking about how if this was happening in most years, it would have been a snow day. Well, to no surprise to anybody, we didn't get the snow, but it did make me think. When you all think about a snow day, what do you think about? And so use the chat window and share an emoji. And to complete the equation, snow day equals, what does a snow day mean to you? Of course, I appreciate that. Of course, my kids are now looking forward to power outages days is what they are looking forward to. They just don't seem to realize if they don't have power, they don't play Xbox. But I love it. I love seeing how you all used to spend your used to spend your snow days. So I appreciate that. And we're going to transition over to talking about the VAP, or the Virginia Alternate Assessment System. So we're going to give, oh, I love it. We're going to give Christina a moment to pull up the presentation. When we talk about the Virginia Alternate Assessment Program this school year, we typically are talking about collecting evidence, assessing students, instructing students, and collecting evidence digitally. But there are many things that haven't changed when we talk about the VAP. And the first one is the criteria, about the Virginia Alternate Assessment criteria. And I see that Christina's window is acting a little wonky, so here we go. Perfect, Christina, thank you. So on the next slide, you'll see the title of the slide is talking about the VAP, and it is talking about the audits. And some of you may have heard that the Virginia Department of Education, which is the VDOE, is conducting audits on students who are identified as participating in the VAP, or once again, that Virginia Alternate Assessment Program. And in some cases, we, as the state follows back up with us, we have contacted schools. So what I forgot to mention is, with the information I'm sharing right now, if it doesn't apply to you, because I know many of you all are not the ones who are working with students who are accessing the VAP in your school building, it may apply to other teachers in your building. So just like with everything else that we're sharing today, if you could please make sure that your teachers do get this information. So last September, a year ago September, or when we had our fall meetings, we talked a lot about the updated criteria information that was needed in the IEP, as well as the justification statement. And some schools have sort of asked us, we've had conversations about why this information is needed. And the one of the main reasons for it is because that's what the Virginia Department of Education requires. And they require it because years ago, we had students who were not appropriate to be participating in the VAP, taking the VAP, which meant they were being instructed on the aligned standards of learning. And so the state really wants us to tighten down on the criteria for students who have a significant cognitive disability. Now on the meeting guide for today's meeting, which I see some of you all are just asking for the link, on the meeting guide in the assessment section, you will note there is a link to the guidance document that outlines what the state means by a significant cognitive disability. In addition to that, though, not only did they tighten up what they mean by significant cognitive disability, they now want IEP teams to document the conversations that they're having. So we know IEP teams are having some really robust conversations around who's appropriate to participate in the VAP. But in some cases, it's not being documented on the IEP. And that is what the state is looking for. So we want to make sure as your IEP teams are talking about the VAP and it is determined that the VAP is the appropriate assessment, that the team is documenting the data they looked at for the criteria, especially that question number 2, does the student have a significant cognitive disability? And then we also want to make sure that the conversation includes, and it's documented, how the participation in the VAP is going to impact the student this school year, as well as the state wants to make sure we're covering with families the impact of participating in the VAP long term. And that includes, even for our 3rd graders, a statement about how participating in the VAP does impact what diploma a student's going to be able to earn, and then potentially impacts after the student graduates. And so these are items that the state is looking for when they do audit some of our IEPs, looking at the VAP criteria page. And so that is one of the things that we wanted to share with you, that the audits have been happening since 2017. As we hear from the state back on certain IEPs, we might get in contact with you directly. But our goal is that when the state does look at our IEPs, they're seeing all of the required information that they've told us needs to be included. We are seeing, but not as much as we used to. In some cases, the justification statement says something along the lines of, the student is being instructed on the aligned standards of learning, therefore they're taking the VAP. Well, that is not a valid statement. And go along with me here. The student who is participating in the VAP is instructed on the aligned standards of learning. But it's the aligned standards of learning instruction that is based off of the VAP decision. We don't first decide to instruct the students on the aligned standards of learning, therefore they need the VAP. So it's the assessment that the student is participating in, the SOL or the VAP, that helps to decide which curriculum we are instructing the student in. And so we want to make sure, once again, that our justification talks about the criteria questions, the data that was used to make the decision, and the impact on the student's instruction now and in the future. All right. Moving to the next slide is the SOL and parent refusals slide. And I seem to be frozen, so I don't know if you all are still with me. Can you all still hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Ellie.
Perfect. So I'm totally frozen on my end. I'm going to assume Christina's moved to the next slide, and I'm going to keep going until you all tell me not to. All right, the next slide is the SOL and VAP parent refusals. So this year, parents have the ability to refuse their child's participation in either the SOL test or the VAP because of COVID. And so the first line takes you to the link that talks about that process and how it's documented. What is on the screen right now is a screenshot of the document that is linked from the meeting guide. So if you're looking at the meeting guide and you're looking at the links, this document that you can see here is linked from the meeting guide. And so it talks through how to document it if the parent is doing the refusal due to COVID. And then parents of students with disabilities have always had the ability to refuse to have their child participate in the SOL or the VAP for their own personal reasons. And so if a parent is refusing to have their child participate in the VAP or the SOL for a reason other than COVID-19, the middle section there outlines what the reasons might be and how it should be documented. So this parent refusal is different than a parent partially consenting to the IEP. So this parent refusal is done when the IEP team has proposed the SOL or the VAP, the parents sign off on it, agreeing with the IEP, and then they refuse to have their child participate in the VAP or the SOL. And so when a parent does sign the parent refusal, our instruction is still in line with whatever the assessment is that we proposed. So whatever assessment is on the agreed upon IEP, that's what's going to align with our instruction. Sometimes we propose the SOLs and the parents agree to the IEP, and then they refuse to have their child participate in the SOL because in their mind the child should be taking the VAP and the SOLs, let's say, are going to be too hard. That is their right, but if they've agreed to the IEP that has the SOL assessment, then our instruction is going to be based off of the standards of learning because that's what's on the agreed upon IEP. In the earlier sessions, the question came up, what if it's a partially agreed to IEP? And so in that case, if it's a partially agreed to IEP and the parents don't agree to the SOL, we've proposed the SOL and they do not agree to the IEP, then we go to the last agreed upon IEP and see what that assessment was. And so if the last agreed upon IEP was a VAP, then we are instructing the student and assessing them with the VAP. And then once again, if there's a partial consent and the parents don't agree with the SOL proposal, if the last agreed upon IEP had an SOL on it, then that's what we're instructing the student on and assessing them with. So this is different than a partial agreement, what I'm talking about today. This is a parent refused to have the child participate in the SOL or VAP for whatever reason, and when you click on that link, you'll see the directions outlined for you. The next few slides, and I apologize that I'm frozen. I'm feeling Brad's pain right now because I don't have the PowerPoint printed out in front of me either. But the next few slides outline the training options that are available for your teachers who have students participating in the VAP. The assessment team has put together 6 modules, and as Christina scrolls through the modules, you'll see the content of each of them. The 6th one they're currently working on, and that will be coming out soon. The 6th module covers the digital collection of evidence. We are collecting all of our evidence for the VAP digitally, and so nobody's going to have to put paperwork in the 3-ring binder this year, but therefore there's a process that's involved with it. But you'll see the different modules. Some of them cover the decision, who is appropriate to participate in the VAP. Some cover picking out the aligned standard of learning that will be assessed. If that hasn't done yet, typically by now that has been done, but this, as we know, is not a typical year, and in which case, if your teachers haven't done that yet, we want them to start picking out the ASOL that they're going to be really focusing instruction on and then assessing on. And after they do that, then there's a module on that if they haven't done that yet. Let me clarify. There's also a module on teacher-created resources. And we're having teachers this year are sharing resources that they've created so we don't have to recreate the wheel. If you're at a school, you don't need to recreate necessarily something somebody else has already made. Those resources are available on a Google site that has been put together. And if your teachers don't have access to that Google site yet, they can contact Debbie Miller, Amber Terry, or Michelle Henry, and somebody will put those in the chat window for me, and they will make sure your teachers have access to the teacher-created resources folder. What's great about this is it's teachers sharing with teachers, but there is a little caveat. The resources that are in there have not been vetted by anybody in central office. So if a teacher posts a resource and they say it's great for a particular ASOL, we are asking you, as you go to use that resource, for you to also make sure that in your opinion, your professional opinion, it's a good match for that ASOL. It's possible somebody makes a mistake. Maybe they put the wrong ASOL up there, or they missed part of the ASOL. It covered the addition part and it didn't include subtraction. And so we want teachers to look at things with a grain of salt. And we also ask that as teachers are looking at the resources and posting resources, we're not sure that everybody has copyrighted everything as they were supposed to. So just keep that in mind. If somebody has posted a book up there, if you don't have that book, well, most likely you shouldn't be using that resource if you don't own the book in your classroom. So just be aware of those and know that they haven't been vetted by central office. So you would want to use, like I said, use your own, look at it with your own professional lens. But there are resources up there for both the instructional component, because first, before we assess, we have to, of course, instruct, and then also with the assessment. So take a look if you haven't already. Oh, I just got connection. And so moving to the next slide. The next slide is a screenshot that shows what the considerations are for the digital collections of evidence. Module 6 is going to work through this document, but this document gives teachers an idea of how they're going to collect the evidence digitally and what some of the evidence might look like. And this is available. The links to it is on your meeting guide. Going to the next, this is a Google site. There's a link on your meeting guide to a Google site with assessment of resources for the VAP. And this is a new site this year that has the modules and the teacher resources, et cetera, et cetera. So it's available for your teachers. So if they haven't seen it, we hope they'll take a look. And here's the slide that I just spoke to, which I thought was earlier up, those teacher-created resources. So we're going to just scroll to the next one. The assessment team is offering 4 question and answer sessions for your colleagues who have students participating in the VAP. Your questions can deal with anything: identification, instruction, selecting the ASOL, assessment, pulling together the evidence, and any questions to do with the VAP. Feel free to come to one of these 4 question and answer sessions and ask the experts, and they will be there to help you. And lastly, the turn-in date is April 14th, which for some people that might seem pretty far away, but with knowing how exceptional the school year has been, if teachers haven't started working on the VAP, it's pretty close. So don't want to make anybody nervous, but you know, it's not as far off as it might sound. So hopefully teachers are starting to have that conversation. Once again, knowing how different the school year has been, it's okay if they haven't really focused on it too much, but let's start thinking about the VAP now and what support the assessment team and the instruction team, the adaptive curriculum team, can do to help your teachers. We're all in this together, so let's help each other out. All right, and the scoring event, what will be interesting, we've mentioned how we're collecting all the evidence virtually and digitally. Well, there's actually a possibility that the scoring event, which normally takes place either at, Ktea over in Fairfax, or at last couple of years we were at Virginia Hills, we might be doing it virtually this year, so stay tuned to that one. All right, ESY, this is the January 25th lead teacher meeting, isn't it? So we know that we should be talking about extended school year services for the summer. Now, extended school year services, we heard Ellen earlier talk about recovery services. And as Ellen Glazer was talking about recovery services, she mentioned compensatory services. Some of you all have asked about intervention. And then here's the third service, or, big service for the summer, the extended school year services. We don't have much information that we can share with you all at today's meeting, and we hate to say that. But with how exceptional this year has been, some of the information we'd be sharing now, such as the dates and all of that information, we can't do it right now. But what we can do, excuse me, is let you know that we hope within the week we'll be able to start sharing information. Extended school year services, the reasons why a student would be appropriate for ESY are the same as always. And so the ESY discussion guide will be coming out very soon. We're going to be looking at the same types of data and having the same types of conversations when we consider ESY. And we are looking at similar models to what we've done in the past, but more information will be coming soon. And soon after we're able to start sharing information such as the dates, the hours, etc., we're also then going to have the job applications open. So hopefully you all will still be interested in working this summer during ESY. But there's still some things up in the air. Virtual, in person, what exactly is it going to look like? And those are some of the decisions that are and conversations that are happening right now. So more ESY to come soon. Certainly by our March 8th meeting, which is not that far away, we'll have more information. But hopefully you'll be getting some information shared out next week. We're hoping to talk a little bit to principals about it this week, so that's coming. All right, segueing into the next slide. OSEI updates, the Office of Special Education Instruction. On your meeting guide, there's a number of links here, and I'm just going to quickly go through these next few slides to share information with you so that we can get to an activity that Wendy and Gina have for us at the end of the meeting here. But first, I wanted to let you know, March 8th, so the next time we meet happens to be a staff development day. And the Office of Special Ed Instruction, as well as instructional services, many departments. But we're putting together our offerings for that date. And here's just a few of the offerings which will be offered that date. And information for this can be found on the Special Ed Hub. While we're talking about professional development offerings, one of the things I wanted to remind you of are what I labeled always available trainings. Did you know the Special Ed Hub has over 50 trainings, asynchronous trainings? So depending on the topic or the staff member, there are over 50 trainings that might help meet their needs. You might have a paraprofessional, a general ed teacher, a special ed teacher, somebody new to special ed who needs some information. And there is, like I said, over 50 trainings that are on the Hub. What you can do, or what the Hub does, is it might take you to My PDE. Like there are some trainings that we work together with the Office of School Support, and they've put some trainings on My PDE. And so the link on the Hub takes you to My PDE, and you can complete the trainings, and then you get credit for it right in My PDE. Other training links take you to Google Classroom, and after you complete the training and answer the questions to make it a little interactive, then the teachers or the staff member will get credit there. So that information, those trainings are available for you and your teams whenever and as needed. All right. So the KTEA, there's a reminder here for KTEA. As you and your teams are assessing your students with the KTEA, we've come to realize that one of the struggles of us all being at home is that the resources that we often would share are at school or they're over at my colleague's house. So we just wanted to put this reminder out there that for those of you who are doing a KTEA or your colleagues, please let them know, they need to have the scoring manual when they are scoring the subtests. And if they don't have it at home because it's at your colleague's house, they can access it online in Q Global. We've heard that some scorers maybe were trying to score it without using the scoring manual, and it's not possible. We're not going to get the information that we need for the test, for the write-up, without using the scoring manual. So please make sure you, if it's you or your colleague, are using the manual, whether it's the actual physical copy or if they need to go on to Q Global. Couple resources I wanted to share with you. I'm getting close to the end here. But the Virginia Department of Education, they produce a newsletter that comes out, I don't even know how frequently, but it often has some really good links involved in the newsletter that takes you to whether it's a website or resources created by the Virginia Technical Assistance Center or TTAC, or maybe it takes you to public web pages, and it deals with a variety of topics. This newsletter has a lot of helpful information in it. And you might have received emails from colleagues of mine at central office who send you links from the newsletter. Well, we thought this time one of our directors said, why not just share the link to the newsletter? So here it is if you're interested in receiving the newsletter from the Special Ed Instruction section of the Virginia Department of Education. The link is on it. You guessed it, that meeting guide. One of the links that came out this month that is exciting, and it's not only for your special ed teachers, but also your general ed colleagues, is the International Dyslexia Association, or IDA. They are extending free membership for teachers. And they say here on this blurb here that the starter membership is a year of resources at no cost. So for, like I said, both you and your general ed colleagues, because we know students with dyslexia are not only in our special ed classroom, go ahead and sign up and see the different resources that they have available at this website. So we're excited about that. And last one for me, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues. Unique learning systems. This is for you to share with your Cat B teachers, your teachers who are working with students who are being instructed on the aligned standards of learning. Unique learning system is, many teachers have heard about Unique and have wanted to use it for years. Well, with us being virtual this year, we've put it through finally the tech approval process and gotten approval to purchase it. We are purchasing this for our Cat B teachers. And a training did roll out today. It's an asynchronous training that teachers can participate to learn more about Unique, because we don't want to just purchase this expensive program and give it to teachers without any support. So there's this training that's going to help your teachers, but if they're interested in getting the program, all they have to do is contact their adapted curriculum team member, and they will be getting access to this license. We're in the process of finalizing the order. You know, things take a little longer than we always expect them to, but hopefully we'll have those licenses to give out shortly. I'm hoping by tomorrow, but we'll see how long it takes to get approved. So your Cat B teachers are probably going to be excited about this, and they can reach out to get access to the Unique Learning System. And with that, I told you I was just going to shoot some information at you right real quick. So with that, I'm going to take a deep breath, and I'm going to turn this over to my colleagues, Gina North and Wendy Bowen, who are going to talk to you about connecting with families.
Hi, everyone. Yes, Gina and I actually have been working with Ellie and trying to gather data on how the different schools are connecting with families. So in other words, you know, how are you keeping families up to date with, you know, successes as well as concerns? So what we wanted to do is we wanted to give you an opportunity to share with us on what you're doing. So Gina is going to put in the chat at this time a link. And what the link is a way for you in your groups to document answers to questions. Next slide, please. So the questions that we would like you to talk about in your group are in relation to how you share information with families regarding student progress. Does your school have a specific process that you work with? If so, how is it working? What are some of the challenges you might have? And then how do you document not only your conversations, but next steps as well as follow-up? So we're going to put you in random groups so that you can share with people from other schools. And what we would like you to do is to document this on the PowerPoint, the answers that you come up with. We're probably going to have about 10 to 12 minutes to do this. Are there any questions?
So there's one slide for each group. If you find it's not enough space to type in what you need, feel free to make a copy. Everyone should have edit access. All right, if there's no questions, off we go. I know, nobody said anything yet. Microphone's on in each group. Doesn't mean they're working, but they're at least on.
When we did one of our breakout sessions earlier, I had one group where it did not work, so they were just typing in the chat box.
Yeah, this morning there was one that didn't do it, but this one looks like it's working better. All right.
The group I was in did not. It was frozen. So we logged out and logged back in, and I don't know how to get back in there.
Do you know what group you're in, or do you care what group you go to?
I don't care.
Okay.
What about group 9? They only have 2 people.
Group 9, okay. Here we go. I wonder how they only got 2 people. They were not supposed to be. There should be at least 4. Oh, some people logged out. Problem.
Yeah, I got kicked out. I got kicked out, had to sign back in.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of I got kicked out a couple times today too.
Today is not a good day for this system.
All right, let's see. I'm just going to randomly move people. Okay, did I get him? I think I got him.
Yeah, I think you got him.
So I set a timer. They've got a little over 4 minutes left. That was 10. We can give 12 if we think. We need a few more minutes.
You know what? Karen and Kathy didn't move.
What?
Nope. I'm looking at the...
Yeah, I just noticed they didn't move either.
You know what? It won't let me update.
This system has been really bad all day.
I think it's just overtaxed because there's so much training going on.
Yeah, I agree.
I got an error message saying another moderator changed group assignments. So, okay. Well, let me see. I mean, they're not in the main room anymore.
They are on mine, but not yours.
No, I see.
Let me see. You're reconnecting.
So funny.
Oh my goodness, this is terrible.
It is terrible. Yeah, because mine still shows them in the main room.
Yeah, now they're back.
Yeah, I'm still in the main room.
I don't know, I swear I tried.
No, I'm good. That's all good. I rarely get kicked out, so.
Oh, see, so it's your turn then.
I guess. It hardly ever happens to me, but so.
Well,
every time my computer froze.
Well, that happened to me too, just a little while ago, like Ellie.
Yeah, that was, I've never had that happen, and I'm surprised you all can still hear me.
I almost panicked, Ellie. I was like, oh no, I can't move. And the timer's going and going and going, and I'm like, oh, we're going to run to 10, and I'm still stuck.
It totally happened to me this morning when I was presenting too, and my second screen went completely, so all my notes, I had to wing it.
Yeah, I know. It's like, good thing it was the second presentation, because otherwise I wouldn't have known what the slides were.
Yeah, well, my system decided to update. It shut me down, and then it said that it needed to update.
I hate updates.
Yeah, so it was like, and it was the slowest update known to man. I was like, seriously, today we're updating?
Right.
That happened to me too before this session, and that's why I was late, because it took about like 20 minutes for my computer to restart.
Yeah, that's exactly.
I'm going to give everyone a 2-minute warning.
Okay.
I'm glad that talking points came up this morning, because I just learned about that last week, and that's an amazing program.
That's what I heard. So I'm interested to go in and see what that program is. I haven't looked at it yet.
And I don't know if the person said it this morning. So it translated. So if you write it in English, whatever language the parents have picked, it translates it to their language, like Urdu, let's say. And then when the parents write back in Urdu, it translates it back to you in English. And it will also give a warning if it doesn't think it did a good translation. So you also get a good feel for whether or not, it's
That's awesome. That was Ktea asked from multi-agency, because they do run into, it's really hard to get translators, so for their group. So they were talking about it, but I had not tried it yet.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. I was telling Ellen about it for ESY this summer.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, the ESOL teacher at my last school used it and said it worked really well.
That's awesome.
Gina, do you have access to these? You have access to all the PowerPoints, right? That people have signed on?
Yes, we all, whoop, there's my timer. Yeah, we all do. All right, are you ready? Coming back.
Yeah.
You at our conference. Maybe unique to the outside of email and phone calls.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. Hopefully you had some great conversations in your groups. I heard a couple really awesome conversations. Would anyone like to share something that came out of their group, either on how they document, a process, some challenges, anything that you can that's going to help us when we move forward to look at creating something that would work for schools? Ellie?
One of the things I was wondering if a group would share, we were just talking about this back in the main room while you all were working. We learned about something called talking points this morning, And I see that a few of you have put talking points on here. Would anybody who put it on be willing to share what talking points is and how you use that? Angeli.
So if you're familiar with Remind, Talking Points is very similar, and it's an online program site where you are able to text families, and it automatically translates what you say to families who they say they need it translated, but also when they respond back to you, it translates it into the language that you need it to be in. It's wonderful. However, parents have to agree to get the text. And that's like the challenge that I talked about is, yes, almost all of the teachers at my school use this. And as the special ed teacher, I can be put as a co-teacher in the class so that I have access to all of my teachers' talking points. The problem is that the majority of the families don't agree to using it. So then it's kind of pointless. One of my classes, there are 6 families out of the 20-some in the class who are signed up on talking points. So it's a great thing, but it has its challenges.
Thank you for sharing.
Angeli, are they like not agreeing because they are like don't understand it or nervous about using it, or are they just like not responding?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, the majority of the families at my school are Spanish speaking, and we have had the conversations with them with interpreters present. And so a lot of them are just unresponsive, which is what we see a lot of with our frustration, is we are just struggling to have those conversations with families because parents are working. And when we ask them and tell them about the challenges we're having, their response is, "We're at work. What do you want us to do?" I'm like, okay, great, thanks. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
It definitely is. Thank you. Has anyone created any kind of documentation form that they've used for their school? And if so, how is that working? Or any particular system-wide for the school? Other than the usual contact logs, those kind of things. Okay, it looks like everyone is using the contact logs, documenting that way.
Oh yeah, keeping individual notes. Yeah.
Right. All right. Thank you guys for sharing. This is going to be really helpful as we move forward to create something. Thank you.
All right. And so I believe that brings us to this activity. Yep. All right. We have made it to the end of the information giving. And once again, this meeting, just a ton of information that we sent your way. So what we would like to do this time is set up a way for you all to process what we talked about today, have conversations with your colleagues, and maybe even ask questions. And so what we're doing is we're setting up a way to do this. Some of you may have seen before. We're going to have 3 different environments. The first one is a watering hole, and that's where you can meet with people from your region and talk about what came up today. And we're hoping that the PSLs who are with us will be joining their particular region, and so they might be able to help with the conversation or any questions that you have. So the watering hole is a place where you can go and talk with your colleagues from your region. Some people like to process in quiet. You know, they want to be able to think about what we shared, look at their notes, and if that's how you would like to process, we're going to have room 6, which is called the cave. And so if you're in the cave, we ask that there be no conversation happening in the cave so that the people who like to process information a little bit quietly have that opportunity. And then lastly, people can stay in the main room And in the main room, we're going to have the moderators from today's session. We're going to be in the main room, and we're going to be here to answer questions in the main room. When you're in the main room, though, we're not going to use the chat window, because if you put it in the chat window, it's going to go to all the other groups, and we don't want to interrupt the work that they're doing. So when you're in the main room, we'll just be raising our hand and turning on the microphone. So those are the 6 rooms that were, or 7 rooms. The main room, 1 for each region, 1 through 5, and then room 6 is the cave. On the right-hand side of the screen, it shows you how to get into a breakout room. You're not going to see it yet because I haven't started the breakout room. But as soon as we start the breakout rooms, you're going to have the option of moving and switching rooms. And in order to do this, on the bottom right-hand side of your screen, you might see a blue button with arrows on it, or the actual menu bar that's open. So you want the menu bar to be open. And once the menu bar is open, next to the chat window, or the chat icon, there is an icon of 2 people, it looks like, and on the screen here you can see it has an 82 on it. So basically, that's the participant window. And when you go to the participant window, you will, once I have the breakout rooms available, you will then be able to scroll down underneath the list of everybody. So you're going to see the list of all 70 people who are in the room right now. And then next to each group, like on the screen it shows group 1, and there's a door to the right of it. See that door with the arrow? If you want to join group 1 because you're region 1, you're just going to click on that door and it's going to put you in group 1. And then if you want group 3 because you're region 3, you just scroll down, keep scrolling down until you see group 3, and then click the door icon on the right-hand side. Now, because this is how today is going for us, I am totally frozen yet again. So I am wondering if one of my colleagues could set up the breakout groups for me. We are doing breakout groups. And maybe Brad, if you're still in the room, or anybody else, I can't see the chat window.
I can start doing that.
Okay, so we're doing breakout groups, custom assignment, people can switch rooms, and then we need 6 breakout rooms. And then once Brad does that, your screen will go blank for a second, and it will say breakout rooms are starting, and when we come back, you can then follow the directions on the right-hand side of your screen to go to your breakout room. If you're not able to figure it out, or if it's not working for you, no worries. You'll stay in the main room with us, and we will answer your questions in there. Okay?
Thank you, Ellie. I feel so bad. You keep freezing on us. Okay, so there were some questions in the main room, Ellie, in the chat from before. So I wonder if once everybody moves, I'll take a look to see if we covered them. I didn't know if you got a chance to look down the list.
Nope, I'm frozen completely.
Yeah, I know. That's why I figured what I'll do is
You'll be my eyes and ears.
Right. I will go down them and see if you've already answered them. It was when you were presenting with your team. So let's see. Jen, do you have a question for Ellie or us?
This isn't really a question, but I think one of the moderators started moving people in the breakout groups, which freezes everybody else, so you can't see the door.
Oh.
I wonder if that's happening because I'm frozen and I'm in the breakout window.
Yes.
Like I'm in the group.
Oh, that's what it is.
Now they're back.
Okay.
No, they're not. Sorry.
Jen, this is Andrea. Sorry, this is Andrea Stange. We had this issue before. It's because there's so many people going to different rooms. It's just we'll lock people out for a bit, and you just have to be very patient.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, from my end, it looks like the rooms are set up.
Yes,
okay,
they are.
All right, so Debbie, how about if we do the questions that you have, and if you're still in the main room with us, we'll also take your questions.
Yes. Jen, did you want to answer the question because you still had your hand up?
Nope, I just forgot to answer it.
Okay, so let me look, Ellie, because, okay, so it says, someone asked for the link for the unique learning system. Was that already taken care of?
So the link for information for that is on the meeting guide.
Okay.
And, well, basically it just says contact your adaptive curriculum team member. The information about Unique is in the slide.
Okay, so I'll put something in the chat about that. So it's on the learning system to contact your OSCI specialist?
Yep.
Okay, so that one. Melanie, you have your hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. I have two questions that are related about parent refusals for testing. The first question is on the slide that you guys have, slide 37. It looks like the COVID refusal forms are linked, but this is just a screenshot. Where do we find those forms?
Thank you. That is on the, and I apologize for not saying that it was a screenshot. I meant to, but I was frozen, so
that's okay. Yeah.
I didn't follow my script. So on the meeting guide, which we can repost, there is a link to the VAP SOL refusal in the assessment session.
And then just a question additionally about that. So just to make sure I'm clear, if parents refuse, if the parents don't agree with the school's base team's proposal, we just document that on the plop, and then we select that the kids will do the assessment on the IEP, but then fill out the refusal form. Is that correct or not?
So thank you for asking. So if the parents don't agree with the decision, what they should likely do is not consent to it. Well, two ways. If we propose it and they sign off on the IEP in full consent, that means that's now what we're preparing the student for.
Right.
So if we put the SOL, we're preparing the student for the SOL, and they've signed off on the IEP, so that's what we're following. The refusal is saying, even though that's what we're preparing them for, they're not going to take the test on the test day.
Mm-hmm.
If the parent doesn't want us to make that change, if we're switching, let's say, from the VAP to the SOL, then that's where we would want them to do a partial consent, because a partial consent means I don't agree with your decision, and I want to go with our last agreed upon decision. And
okay,
I from procedure can help with that part.
Yeah, does that make, Melanie, does that make sense? That
yes,
the difference would be, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you. We have a situation that's going to fall in the first one that you mentioned, so I just want to make sure I was clear on that. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, and make sure you documented the...
Oh, sorry, I wanted to say, I appreciate you asking, but also you might make sure the parents realize that, because parents might not realize that their refusal to, like, let's say, take the SOL doesn't change what we're teaching the child. And so
I think it's just that they don't want the testing to occur this year. They know that we're still going to be teaching the same content, but they just have already asked about the opt-out. Yeah.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So we just want to make sure the last thing is that PWN is clearly, that you clearly document that PWN, the decisions, and then if they sign partial. So that's the next step.
Thank you.
Jeff, did you have a question?
Yes, thanks. Somebody had mentioned that Tracy Puckett is the person to contact for the Ktea training. Is she also the person to contact for Brigance, or is that somebody else?
Thanks, Jeff, for asking. So for for the Brigance, you would want to contact your adaptive curriculum team member. So whether that is Matt, Heather, Mo, David, Amy, or Jen Skarkey. Do you know your person, or do you want me to find it for you?
I'm not sure if I know.
If you let me know your region, I can tell you.
Oh, sure. Region 2?
Region 2, so that is, he's the new person. You've got Matthew. I'll put his name in the chat window since it's I don't know how to say his last name.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Coolidge.
Oh, is that all it is? There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Karen?
Yes, my question goes all the way back to the start of our meeting when we were talking about those early childhood preschool transitions to kindergarten. I just wanted some clarification. So we are required, if a student is in the preschool PAC program and doesn't have the full evaluation criteria, if we want to recommend for enhanced OT, we have to take that child fully through the reeval process?
So it doesn't have to fully be the reeval process, but the student does need formal assessments. And this, we have collaborated with psych services on this, so hopefully it won't be very surprising information for anyone. But if it's only if the child has never had any sort of formal evaluation.
Okay, so if it's those students that haven't had any type of formal evaluation that we should be looking to get formal evaluations on.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Angelique?
So I have two questions. The first one is for the Module 6 for the VAP training. Any idea what, or when will we be informed when it is available, or is it just something we have to keep checking back to that site for?
What's your preference?
I mean,
Would you
I
like to send an email out?
Yeah, I would love an email saying Module 6 is available so that I just know, okay, great, I can go in and do it. That would be awesome.
Perfect. Then I will ask for them to let lead teachers know that.
That would be great. And then my second question goes along with VAP as well. So if a student is returning back in the building, do we still do everything digitally for their VAP, or because they're in person, is it then a binder?
Thank you. At this point, everything's going to be digital. So even if you are collecting it in paper, we'll be having you scan it and enter it as a digital.
Beautiful. All right, great. Thank you.
I love it.
I know.
So
you're making folks excited. Carolyn?
There's
Hi. So on the, when we were talking about VAP, you were talking about documenting our conversations around those decisions. Is that on the plot page, the PWN, some of both? Where should those conversations be documented?
I appreciate you asking, because yes, there's so many spots, and actually it's a third choice. In the justification statement area on the VAP criteria page. And I'll let my procedural colleague mention if it's supposed to also be on the PWN, but there's actually a place for the justification statement on the VAP page.
So you wouldn't need to put it on the PWN unless because it's part of that IEP, unless there was a reason we were proposing it and there was some reason the parent wasn't in agreement, or if there was a problem that if you needed to further elaborate on the PWN, but you don't necessarily have to.
And then the justification statement also includes our discussion about long-term impacts on that student?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you for checking.
Thank you. Kelly?
Hi, yeah, I just have a quick question to kind of clarify. I've been asked by my team a few times in a few different ways. So I know once we do go back face-to-face, we'll obviously have to then do those addendums for students who are receiving face-to-face services. But I know at my school, to make sure we're keeping those classroom bubbles, I personally, just because a student is back in the building, I personally might not be meeting with them face-to-face and providing those IEP hours with them face-to-face. So am I still addending to add those face-to-face hours when they're actually in the building, or am I keeping those hours virtual because they're receiving SPED services virtually, even though they're in the building?
So the services are going to be, if they're coming in and they're coming in for face-to-face, you would document the face-to-face. It's just like when we were doing when students were not able to go into their, let's say, first grade class because their teacher was not, we're keeping in the bubbles, their teacher's not in person and we're not mixing groups yet. But you would indicate that it was happening virtually but you're still counting the hours, the gen ed hours. You weren't just removing them. So it's kind of that same, you know, it's the same concept. But so you want to just explain it on the plot page.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was just going to verify. So we're still adding the face-to-face hours, but the 2 days a week they're coming, we're just documenting on the plop. Those hours might still be virtual.
Well, so are you talking about the hybrid students or our 4-day students?
The hybrid students.
Oh, the hybrid students. Okay, so for the hybrid students, you can document them, both the face-to-face and then the virtual. Do I have Ellen or Lori on here? I just want to make sure that I'm saying that correctly. And Dawn, you're on here. Can we do the double? I can't right now. I'm drawing a blank. Can we do the double for the hybrid? Dawn or Ellen?
So I don't think.
Go ahead, Ellen.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I don't think I completely understand the question. I thought I understood it when she asked it at first, but now, so let me just make sure. So a student is a 4-day-a-week student, and they're coming in for instruction. Say they are maybe a non-CAT student who is able to come to school, or a CSS kid, and you're going to work with that student, but you're going to work with that student virtually because you guys are keeping bubbles. Is that the situation?
So yes, that's part of the question, but more so for the students who are coming 2 days a week.
A hybrid. So they're hybrid students. So they're not, we haven't put them 4 days. They're coming, they're not our groups 1 through 4 that are coming in for the 4 days. They're the new groups coming in that are going to be hybrid, 2 days virtual, 2 days in person. Is that student?
Yes.
Okay. Dawn, does that make sense?
I'm still missing some of the question. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I have students who are coming back into the building eventually, and they're only coming on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So I know that student on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, I would document on their IEP that they're getting face-to-face services, and then obviously on Thursday and Friday, they're getting those services virtually. But when my students come back, based on their classroom that they're in, I might personally not be able to work with them face-to-face because we can't cross bubbles. So I can't go into their classroom if I'm also working in other classrooms, and they can't come to me face-to-face if I'm having students from other classrooms come. So I'm really not providing them face-to-face instruction. They're in the building getting instruction face-to-face, but I'm still providing it virtually.
Yep, I get it now. Ellie just, yeah, I think that you would still count what you're doing as the virtual and the face-to-face.
Okay. That's how I was relaying it to my team, but I wanted to make sure that was correct because technically they're not getting that face-to-face services. It is still virtual. It's just in the building.
Yeah, they're in your building though, so I would make that face-to-face. I think that's the guidance that we had been given.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Dawn, because it's a little confusing as we're mixing now the groups together, and we know that they can't go into their general ed classroom because they can't mix groups, but their general ed counterparts are in the building, but they can't go there, so they have to access that class virtually even though they're in the building. Does that make sense? It's kind of the same, it's the same process.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right, Megan.
No, I was just clarifying. So if they are in the building, then they get face-to-face hours, and then we will figure out how we're doing that. Because there might be some kids who are getting all face-to-face, but there might be some that are going to be participating virtually for part of the time. So just to simplify, if in the building, they get face-to-face hours.
I think what you'll need to do is make sure we're clarifying on the plop if they're not able to, because for the parents, they may not understand. So clarifying either in the PWN and on the plop will help.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just have a really quick question, and I think it's clarifying, but could you just reinforce for me in regards to preschool transitions, base schools are responsible for the reevaluation process, testing, holding the meetings, etc. Is that correct? It's base school responsible.
Yes. Be prior to, there's a cutoff date where early childhood is dealing with it, and then when we get to a point. Christina, did we get to the point yet where base school is completing the evaluations for the students?
I don't remember seeing the testing memo come out yet, but there should be a memo that will be coming out soon in the infogram, so I would look for that.
Yeah, because that clarifies the dates, but we can check with Denise and get back to PSLs.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. Well, thank you all so much. I know we've gone beyond time. We're at 3:32. If you have any additional questions that haven't been answered, please send them to us or connect with your PSL and they'll connect with us. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for a wonderful afternoon. And we will post the recorded session once I'm able to.